Whenever you have a mic, it becomes serious.
It's very serious, yes. Very formal. Video? So we're live? Cool. All right. Well, thank you for coming, and welcome to the Leonor R. Fuller Gallery at the Kenneth J. Minart Center for the Arts at South Puget Sound Community College. My name is Sean Barnes. I'm the gallery director. And we are sitting in the exhibition, solo exhibition of Hale Ekinci, titled Compound Subjects. Before we begin, I have an acknowledgement that South Puget Sound Community College is located on the ancestral lands of the Stachos Band and Squaxin Island Tribe and Nisqually Indian Tribe, who have long been stewards of the region's waters, plants, and animals. The southernmost point of the Salish Sea, these lands were and still are a place of gathering, trade, and community for many Coast Salish peoples. We recognize that all who are not Salish peoples are visitors here. We commit to join these peoples to share their history, build relationships, increase representation, and restore the living world around us. I'd also like to give special thanks to those who support the arts here at SPSCC, the Leonor Fuller Gallery Committee, the SPSCC Foundation and the Board of Trustees, all of our generous donors and sponsors, especially the artists who are the reason we are here and without whom life would have no meaning as far as I'm concerned. And tonight, we are honored to be visiting with Hale Ekinci. I'll tell you a little bit about Hale. She is from Karamürsel.
Karamürsel.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm butchering. In Turkey, and lives in Chicago. And Hale is a multidisciplinary Turkish artist, designer, and educator based in Chicago. She received her MFA in Interdisciplinary Arts and Media at Columbia College, Chicago, and is currently chair and an associate professor of art and design at North Central College. And in her work, she is exploring personal history, cultural identity, gender politics, and craft traditions. Her works vary from videos to embroidery, paintings embellished with vibrant colors, patterns, and autobiographical relics. She was recently a Facebook Chicago artist in resident. Her work has been exhibited nationally at Expo Chicago, Studio Gang, Co-Prosperity, One After 909, Woman Made Gallery, South Bend Museum of Art, Cohen Line Museum of Art, St. Louis Artists Guild, and Queens College Art Center. Her videos have been screened internationally, including New York City, Berlin, Warsaw, and Jerusalem. She completed residencies at Acre, Jaiwar, Barcelona, Momentum Worldwide Berlin, Elsewhere Museum, and Chicago Artists Coalition. So welcome, Hale. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited about this exhibition because there's so much going on, and I feel like we've got a lot to talk about. And we've already had the opportunity to talk a little bit, so we'll share some of those things with everyone else too. So I'm just going to jump in with a question.
Okay.
And
sounds good.
If that's okay with you. And so I'm just going to start with the first question I have. And so about the forms of your work. The forms of your work are both they're in a conversation with painting and sculpture. They're hanging on the wall and they occupy three-dimensional space. And also collage. And those materials and techniques are varied, and they have their specific origins and these unique histories. Like photographic transfer and the painting elements and crochet and embroidery and fabric and found content. Where do these forms come from? Like the shapes that all of these materials take?
Like formally?
Formally or
Visually?
or otherwise, or even just the shape of them. Like there were,
Okay.
some folks were asking about, the shape of this piece over here in particular.
Yeah, okay. So I like to start with the fact that I'm actually not trained as a textile artist. I, as Sham mentioned, got my MFA in interdisciplinary arts and media. I was making video work. I teach design, mostly digital art, and I found myself, instead of making video, I would knit at home after work, after spending all day in the computer lab. And then I took an embroidery workshop, and I realized that I actually know it, mainly because my mother and grandmother and all the women that surrounded me growing up, I grew up in a very close-knit community, would work on some sort of crafts related to fibers. And I realized, I always joke that through osmosis, I learned these techniques. I found it very therapeutic and started to combine some of my work from undergrad, even some of the techniques like the photo transfer and collage and drawing. I would do those at school, where I'm trained in the American education system, higher education. So I started to combine these things from my formal education and my informal heritage that I gathered. And I also often think about the separation of high art and fine art and crafts, women's work usually being the one that's not valued or put aside, even though we are surrounded by it every day. And so I started to work with found material instead of canvas or nice, expensive paper. And as I started collecting, I mean, I'm also a thrifter, so I love going to thrift stores. And I started collecting these pattern domestic materials. There's also ideas about home, missing home, or, changing homes. So meaning-wise, these materials also spoke to me. And as I make them, some of the older work is that one, I believe, is the oldest one. And you can see it's been stretched on a frame, like a canvas, wanting to be a painting rectangle. And as so I started about this sort of, this body of work in 2018. And as I made more and more of these stretched rectangles and having these conversations similar to this, I realized, okay, why am I trying to be a painting while I'm not clearly a painting? So I started to bring in more sewing techniques and pleating in the more recent work. There's boning and pleats and quilting, stitching together, leaving wrinkles on, actually embracing what the fabric wants to do that we are so familiar with in our daily lives. And some of the shapes, this is interesting. I first heard that one looks like Australia here, actually. And no one has told me that before. That particular one is scraps. So I also appreciate the resourcefulness of women historically, but also from my family. My mom never throws away anything, and I know so many other stories like that. So that one's just leftovers from others. So that one too. But some of them, like that one, the Untitled Middle Easterners, reminds me of a prayer mat or a house. This one too, it could be a skirt or a house structure, the hanging one. The darker one over there with the little slit, it was a rectangle first, and then I cut around the patterns, and I was like, oh, this looks like a map. And then as I was looking at it, I was like, no, I'm gonna do a slit here, make it also look a little bit like a clothing item with a neck. So I like the ambiguity of like cartography or a clothing item or a body reference or a domestic reference, but keeping it open-ended that someone can say Australia.
Right. Well, I really appreciate the just having that understanding of how these forms, that it's okay to look at some of these forms and think, oh, this that resembles a shawl, or a tent. That, but these forms do still point to domesticity or some origin that comes from. I appreciate the cartography in that, and then transforming it into something more like a garment. Um, but they all do have that quality, especially the piece that's over here. And well, before I leap into that one, for folks that are watching online, if you go to our webpage, you can see images of Hale's work there. But there's a piece called the travel pillow, right? And these forms aren't. That's probably the most specific one in here, I think, that really points to something specifically. But I think the forms are unique in the sense of like fabric that is structure too. Like,
yeah. And I think the travel pillow, I don't know if you would think of it as travel pillow. It's actually travel pillow necklace. Unless I wrote that. I also am very fascinated by language and how language sets up in certain ways, and also takes priority over nonverbal communication. I find that very interesting too, and we'll at some point probably get to that. But with the travel pillow, that also, the reason why I ended up naming it that, I was telling this to someone else the other day. I was working on it. It came from, somebody gave me their grandmother's nightgown that looked like a bed sheet. So I took, and it had this big collar. So that's actually the collar of this nightgown that I took out. And then I decided to stuff it. But by just stuffing it, I think it became something else. The form sort of shifted, and one of the reasons why I love working with textiles is how I can work anywhere. And I was working on it in my backyard, and my neighbor came over, and she was like, "What are you making, a travel pillow?" And I love that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to actually embrace that. And that works with the themes that I talk about too, being an immigrant, and about ideas of place and not being stable. So I was like, oh, that's a perfect thing to actually associate this with.
I think that's a good segue into this other question I had that has to do with like functionality, right, and conceptual in artwork, because the embroidery and the crochet has this long, rich history of utility. I mean, I love this quote. I'm kind of taking it out of the context of the questions, but well, I'll just stick with the first question first. We'll just stay there. But so, do you think that there's a disconnect? I mean, working with the sewing and crocheting in an art context, or do you think that they're informing one another? Like, does the conceptual and the art part add something to, like, the Turkish tradition of Oya, for example?
Okay, I'm gonna try.
Grad school question.
I'm gonna try to be not too forceful because I get heated about women's issues. But the fact that you even ask me this is because of the patriarchy. You know, that historically, like, and I think your quote is actually, he had this quote from Annie Albers that along with cave paintings, threads were among the earliest transmitters of meaning, is very appropriate. I think so. I'm going to bring it. Um, because, I mean, this was probably one of the first forms of art making in human history. But the fact that it's been put into one area, okay, it's for utility, it's for function, but it's been used as adornment and expression for so long, but it's been left out of the gallery mainly because of men and patriarchy. So I think it's like now it's becoming actually having a high popularity textile works, which is great, but I think it should have been up there all along.
Yeah, and I think and the complexities of textiles, and even how, and how um, crocheting finds its way into, maritime traditions and net mending and say, I mean, and I've learned this just over the years. One of my side hobbies is knots, and I, and then I keep, like there's references to the origins of these knots and where they come from, and crocheting actually being also a pastime of male sailors, and but not something you'd talk about or make high art about, right? But the complexities of textiles and designs and patterns, I guess that takes us to that quote, is this transmission of meaning, right? And you talk about the patterns, the symbolic. I'm going to quote you here. The symbolic patterns that serve as a secret language between women to express private and personal sentiments. And so my question for you is, what should viewers be conscious of when attempting to decode your work? Like, what do some of these subtle symbols, what's the significance of some of these things?
Yeah. Well, it's a complicated answer. I love the idea of this nonverbal communication, but then also the secret communication where if you don't know the symbols, you're not in on the message. And again, like as an immigrant, non-native speaker, I relate to these women. So I'll give a side knowledge about the Oya. The edgings are inspired by these very delicate, tiny lace edgings that are typically found on the edges of headscarves. But these headscarves are also utility. It's not like they're used for like daily or working in the farm or in the kitchen. And back in the day, I found through research that women would wear different patterns to communicate their feelings through the patterns. So I found that fascinating and a really beautiful way of expressing something only to those that actually know what's how to speak that language, and the others are left out. So by using the patterns, and I make literal references to some of the existing patterns, like the tulip pattern here is a very traditionally used Ottoman pattern that symbolizes power, that the sultans often wore on their kaftans. So sometimes I reference literal symbols like that that I talk about, but sometimes I make up my own, and I will never tell you what it means. And I like that sort of both as the maker, like messing with the viewer, but then also giving agency to the viewer to make up their own interpretation and meaning by just hinting at them that there is a message, you know? And again, like maybe there isn't actually, right? But by just saying that there might be, then it starts a whole new thinking system. So I think again that also goes back to these other forms of communication. Like once there's a signal and someone willing to receive the signal, that's to me more important than how if it translates completely or not. So in the end, it's more like adoration for this use of visual symbols as communication, not necessarily I have a very important message to tell you, you know.
Which and it's interesting to hearing you talk about that. And I'm trained as a painter, and we use the same language, right, to talk about the material, and that there can be, but it's true that there's been more emphasis given to the language of paint marks, or how we're meant to read a painting, but not so much how to read textiles, even though we've been clothing ourselves and stitching and things like that for centuries. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Also, so people not getting those symbols, not getting that meaning, there's also a lot of humor in your work, and it's subtle, and sometimes I wasn't even sure if how I should feel about what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the lottery in particular. Someone was in here the other day and said it reminded them of Henry Darger. Do you know this guy? He was an outsider artist. I'm not going to digress. Yeah, yeah. Real sketchy history, this guy. But anyway, can you talk about like your use of humor and how that operates?
So in a version of my artist statement some years ago, I actually talked a lot about humor, and in my video work, it's way more obvious, telling a story in a humorous way. I mean, I think first of all, it's my character. I love laughing and I love sarcasm and humor. But actually, in my research, I was reading this book on Middle East, and it said how humor was such an important element in life because it allowed you to talk about things that you're not allowed to talk about in a way without getting punished for it. So in like more restrictive cultures, more conservative cultures, both culturally but then also politically too in some countries. So to be able to criticize the government or someone in your circles, you joke about it and you use sarcasm. And I found that very accurate to like how I use sarcasm in my life, and it made a lot of sense, and I like the political aspect. But then also, like something I think about a lot is how humans put so much importance on themselves, or ourselves, I should say. I'm a human. How we're like so important in like amongst everything, whereas like when you think about it, we're so not important in the universe, that I like putting humor in that way too, like not only because of the political things or being able to talk about things, but also being able to laugh at ourselves, also the things that make us, or the things that make us human. If I may give some examples of humor that I was just telling a few people, I like using these cultural references. Like a lot of the photos are very posed family portraits where everyone is like serious and posing together. They're not candid. And I like juxtaposing that with humorous cultural elements like party hats or solo cups that look like upside down fezzes. So just making them a little more human, bringing the back story a little bit, and then also blending the cultures through those little symbols. And the lottery, the lottery one is actually, I was thinking of um, green card lottery. I don't know if anyone knows about this, but as a immigrant, I had to get a green card, and I had some friends that would apply for the there's a lottery that you can actually, if you're chosen, can get a green card. So I was thinking about that with the lottery. Both me and my sister live in the U.S., and um, in those photos, we had these cherries that we put on our ears, like earrings. Did anyone, was that a thing here?
Like hang the
Yeah.
stem over it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, hanging cherries. And I was like, oh, this looks like like casino things, you know, the slot machines. So I like put us in like a repeated slot machine thing, and put the cherries in there. And then I was like, okay, this will be about the green card lottery. So again, language, like lottery, it's not like gambling, but I was literally taking the word gamble and applying that.
Yeah, and so that I think also taking taking these very serious images and family photos, and we've, you know, many of us have that. We have like the family get together, and there's the cut up. Somebody, you know, I'm always the one in our family photos that has to make the stupid face. I can't just, I don't photograph well, and so I always try to make funny faces. But there's also something I think happening in your work, and this, you know, maybe this is just me, and I see this, but especially in the piece over here, this untitled piece, there's, you know, with the party hat, it destabilizes that image in some way, and I don't want to say it queers it in a sense, but it takes that artifact and adds something to it, and at the same time is taking away something, I think. And that's I think it's a really brilliant use of these colors also, to alter these images, and because the colors have a certain humor in them too, in the lottery, and I mean, and so can you talk something about that? I mean, where does the color palette come from? Because this one over here is very different than the others, but you know,
That's my
is it
COVID
organic
one.
or that's your COVID one? Yeah.
I like your interpretation, by the way. I appreciate you use the word queer. Thanks. That one is, yeah, COVID depression. But I actually really enjoyed painting that one meticulously, like the tiny branches in dark. Again, like in undergrad, I would do these photo transfers, and then I would draw on them. Like I love drawing. Like black lines are my things. So now instead I do the embroidery for line, but I really enjoyed making that, and I wanted to make more, but then I went back to color because it was right before things were starting to open, and I went back to color. The color, I love, obviously, vibrant color, and that's, again, partially because personal taste and what I love to do, but partially of what it says as well. There's this book by David Batchelor, but I'm terrible with names, but called Chromophobia, and he's, what's his last name?
I can't remember, but it's
Okay, it's B
recognized
something.
name.
But in there he talks about how like Western culture's use of white, and associating anything colorful with like infantile or women or primitive cultures. And I'm like, yes, sign me up. That's me. And love everything about that. So there's also, again, social, political reason behind it. And a lot of people that I talk to who come from immigrant families or multicultural families always tell me how like it feels very familiar to them. Like I had a studio visit with a Mexican American artist, and they were saying that it reminded them of home. Um, so I like that too. I think the careless use of color happens more in non-art spaces that also happen to be domestic spaces. So I like that. Um, and how I decide on them changes. Sometimes it comes from the fabric, the pattern, the existing pattern. Um, and sometimes it's like this one is more informed by the patterns because it was all blues and I love pink, so I had to add a pop there. That one, for example, the original photo, even though I transfer it in black and white, the original outfit, that's me as a kid actually wearing a fake folk dancing outfit. It was originally red, so I sort of pulled that from the original photo. In later, more recent works, this one is more recent, I started painting the negative space as well, not just the people. And then the crochet colors come in the end. I sort of base it on the painting element. And I usually, so the designer in me comes out in this. Like I start with the photo transfer, and then I'll take a photo of that, and I'll, in Photoshop on my iPad, I'll try different color combinations before I pick some. And then I start painting, and then as I'm painting, of course, I make changes as well, and then I do the embellishments, and then in the end, the crochet comes.
So there's a lot of labor that goes into making these things, and I want to kind of poke into something you said rather quickly that's of interest to me, and it's the careless use of color in a domestic. Like, I'm an artist, but you walk into my house, and also I'm a gallerist, and you walk into my house, and pictures are just leaning against the wall, right? They're haphazardly just plastered around the kitchen, or so we were talking about the studio versus your train commute and working at home, and you kind of alluded to it a minute ago with the travel pillow. So this difference between being in the studio, and actually we talked about it in terms of the crochet and embroidery and things like that. Can you talk? You kind of talked a little bit how you felt about being in the studio and then working wherever. So can you talk more about that? Like, give us some anecdotes about.
Yeah, I was saying I love my studio. I have a really nice studio and a big artist community, and but I find I do certain things in my studio and then certain things at home or in flux. So and I realized it's again almost like a east-west division. I do my painting and photo transfer, which is very stinky. I use a winter green oil. I do those in the studio. I do my documentation there. My sewing machine is there, so I do the final stitchings and things like that there. But when it comes to crocheting and embroidery, which is the most time-consuming part, the embroidery part really, I'm like, I don't want to do this in my studio. I'm gonna go home, and I like go. If it's nice, I'll sit on my porch or backyard, and I'll do it there. Or after work, after school, like I'll be sitting with my husband and like watch TV and then do my embroidery, and then every like 10 minutes or so ask what happened. He really dislikes it, but I can't not do it. I like being busy, and again, that's like exactly what I saw growing up with women. Like if they would gather, each of them would bring their own knitting or lace work or whatever, and would talk and do. So like I think it just comes out at me. Of course, sometimes it terrifies me because I don't necessarily want to become my mother. But I think I find that the spaces also help do what I do, and feel like more natural. I even, when I had the Facebook commission, it's like huge wall, 25 feet by 10 feet. I was crocheting, and I actually had to travel to France. I literally, half my suitcase was crochet yarn, and I was like crocheting, and then people were asking me, and I was like, okay. I like that aspect of, or again, the travel pillow, of sort of making the work, the process visible and engaging with people through that too. I'm a very social person. I care about community, and I think painting part is kind of hard to bring with you, right? So I think there's something beyond just me merely liking to do it anywhere that it brings, like the conversations it starts, the visibility it brings. I feel like there was one more thing, but and also again, being an international person, folding it up and taking it with me someplace also is means something.
Yeah, I mean, it's that transitory, the ability for that material and the practice to move around and have that social element to it. Not many other art forms allow for that, or to just sit and do and talk and look at another person while you're doing it. Yeah. That repetitive behavior. I mean, there are lots of forms that after the product comes, then we can sit and talk about it, you know, or we can hold it and admire it. But to be, you know, to have a material that you can, as you're working, talk with people about and share a history, or, and then even to be able to tell a story through the knot work and the patterns. And there's so many traditions. The first thing coming to mind is like the Franciscan knots on the rope that the Franciscan monks wear. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. You know, each of those knots have a specific meaning, and but anyway, great. Well, I have those longer questions that we were looking at. We've talked about so much.
Time?
We're doing pretty good, actually.
Okay.
And so I guess what I would like to know, and then we can open it up for questions, is what's next? Because you've got like film, video, photography, then this is all happening. Are you working on another iteration, or?
I actually had a printmaking residency this past summer, where I was doing, instead of photo transfer, I used screen printing for the photos, which makes the repetition so much faster, actually. So I've recently made some work where the people are becoming patterns themselves. And I use some block printing. There's block printing in that one too. So I did that. I think I'm in textiles for a little longer, because again, lately I've been doing embracing what the textile traditionally has been, like bringing in more fashion elements like pleating and things like that. So and irregular shapes, forms. So I'm gonna be doing this for a little bit. Oh, I also, yeah, I love multi-disciplines. I took a ceramics workshop, and I'm now playing with making these little ceramic pieces that hang on the wall where the textile falls down from.
I like that idea.
Yeah, so I'm
sure there's a couple people in the audience that would like that idea as well.
So like I poke holes in the ceramics and like hang the crochet and the textile from that. So I'm interested in exploring where that goes. And I also have been thinking about incorporating video as well, either projecting onto the surface or using these in the video work in a way. But video, the way I make it, just takes so much time to edit. It's like animated layers and layers. So I typically need like a good chunk of time to do that, and teaching during the academic year is just not possible. So maybe summer. But yeah, and then who knows what I'll be making in 5 years. Time will tell.
Well, thank you. This is good. Yeah. And so we'll open it up to anyone in the audience in the gallery. If you guys have questions for Hale, if anyone has any questions, right there. And
Hello. Wanting to make sure, yep, it is on. So the thing that really draws my eye the most throughout all of this is the French knots that obscure the faces here. I think partially because I'm familiar with that technique and I know it is a pain and it is time consuming. So it just seems so intentional and it just seems so deliberate and significant because of that time investment. I wanted to ask if that's one of the secrets you're willing to give up, is the meaning with those.
Thank you. That's actually the first question almost everyone asks whenever I engage with viewers. So I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm sure you're not the only one curious. So in all honesty, initially it started out of a need to make the people anonymous, because I was using my family photos and I didn't want them to be like portraits or autobiographical things. I wanted them to be more ambiguous. And then over time, as that became my recipe, I liked how it connected everyone. And I used like my family, my husband's family, and he's from Indiana, crossroads of America. And like I've started incorporating archival photography, especially of like immigrants from Ellis, documented at Ellis Island, things like that, I liked how it became a visual connector of all these people of different backgrounds and cultures. And I also like what it does to identity, how it's not clear. It speaks to the things that I think about identity, how it's malleable. From far away you can't tell, but it's not obstructed fully, right? It's not erased, so there's still a chance of recognition if you come close, but it can change from your angle. So those are the main things that I'm thinking about. One art historian actually told me that in Victorian France, women would wear veils that had these dots on them, to the extent that it would actually hurt their sight and like give them headaches. So I like that's also okay with me if anyone makes that association as a reference.
anyone else? Right up here in front. There. Thank you, Paul.
Hello, thank you for your work and your time and sharing all of that. I love that you use the same family grouping in that piece and that piece, and I know they're separate, but I was wondering, was there a reason that you used the same grouping and made them so, whimsical and humorous in that piece, as opposed to that one, even though they're two separate pieces? Did you, in your mind, have some connection in using the same family grouping?
I actually use same photos in multiple places. Like this one, these photos are also in that one, and it's that I have another one that's not here. So I do that often with these. With some of the photos, I just like get obsessed with. For some reason, like their gestures. Like I love this girl on the left side, how she looks queer, like she doesn't fit into like a like traditional girl pose. So like I just get attached to some of the photos and want to see them in different contexts and arrangements, so I repeat them. One of the things that I do, like in that one where I repeat people almost as a like surface design pattern, part of my instinct in doing that is also to make the people not important. In this case, they're pretty important, but I'm also more and more recently have been thinking about, okay, my portrait phase is done. I'm interested in actually like beyond humans, like how we also can be less important and part of the fabric and the pattern of in the same way a flower is.
Thank you.
When I saw the travel collar, before I saw the label, I thought it was a horse for a workhorse, a collar for a workhorse.
I love that too.
And
A
it
yoke,
made me
yeah.
start to think differently about the whole exhibit. You know, more, I think it's very, obviously your ethnic background is very obvious, but this made me think even deeper. And then I saw it was a travel collar, and I thought about my travel collar, and the whole thing changed. So it's really, the shapes of things, of your things are really, really deeply interesting. And but that one struck me and grabbed me.
Thank you. Could you speak a little bit more about what it made you think of once you made that horse? What did you call horse? What?
Horse collar,
Like
like
a
Horse
yoke.
collar.
yoke,
Yoke.
yeah.
Okay.
Like a horse's
Yeah.
workhorse, a workhorse. I
You said
immediately
it made you see it differently.
I'm sorry?
You said it made you see the work differently.
Well, it made me think more deeply about the possible ethnic background, which, you know, I don't know too much about Turkey, except I did get this ring from a Turkish man. The stone, he told me turquoise is from Turkey, which I didn't know. I thought it was from Arizona or someplace. But, you know, it's just, so you look at something and you immediately think, in a split second, the human mind is amazing. You think in a split second of a team of horses plowing a field. And then you think of what the village might be like and what the farm might be like, and the people, and how they sit around the table at night and what they eat, and all of that. And then you realize, oh, it's a travel collar. It's for somebody on a jet plane. So it's a totally different thing in that same split second. You know, that's why coming to a show, it's just amazing. You know, all these things flash through your mind, and then you go have lunch.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks.
Well, this is a wonderful show. It's really very different. And one other question. What is a very low-level question. What solvent do you use for the photo transfer?
Wintergreen oil.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But not the little herbal kind. It's like synthetic,
Industrial
toxic,
strength
industrial.
wintergreen oil. Thank you. And thank you for your show.
We got time for another one. Yeah, Stephanie back there in the corner.
Maybe it's because I find myself next to the COVID piece, but this one seems non-representational. And the other thing that strikes me is, I came in a little bit late, so I'm not sure if you covered this already, but there was talk about domesticity, and there was talk about knots and kind of traditional textile, the ways of going about it. But there's also the vestments, the adorning of sacred elements, and it tends to, well, sometimes it's non-representational, but it can be, representational and not. Anyway, and maybe it's because this piece looks like it would be something that would be worn. But the question is there an element of the sacred in your work, in the techniques you choose or anything else?
So there are actually people in there. But if you follow the French knots, you'll see the face. You'll find the faces. I was just going a little bit more fluid with the transfer. The sense of sacred, I think a lot about rituals, especially funky, funny, weird ones, and our need.
Thinking about brushing
So-
your teeth and
No, like again, a lot of my older video work, I would like use some of the like Islamic rituals, like actually they're more pagan, but like the evil eye, how like that belief and things you do to get rid of it, the rituals that you do. So I'm fascinated by that, again, the human nature of making sense of things through not making sense, and how that becomes spiritual. I'm not a big fan of organized religion, but I like spiritual and again, these quirky rituals. And the ceramic work, actually, I'm working on a project where I'm paired with a poet, and we had our meeting, and I showed her this ceramic piece with a tongue like textile, and she said it reminded her of an amulet, and I really like that. So I'm actually looking. I have a few books at home right now that I should be reading. I like that idea of amulet and objects sort of protecting you, meaning something just mainly because of the power you give to it. So I do think about those things. Does that answer your question? I wouldn't go as far as sacred, but definitely some sort of spiritual, non-material power.
I think after having that conversation, I think there are a few of these pieces that I could go to superstition also with, I mean, even just the stitching into an image of someone, right? And that there's power in that, right?
I find, like, sometimes I find little evil eyes, like, just pinned inside my clothing that my mom just, like, stuck in there without me knowing. And when you grow up in that culture, in that setting, it's hard. Like, sometimes I do believe in the evil eye, even though, like, scientifically and, like, as a mature, educated, strong woman, I shouldn't, but like deep down, there is a part of me that's like, oh shit, like I'm not gonna talk about this. I might get evil eye, you know. It's there,
And that's the power of it.
And again, I think it's another humbling thing. Like, who am I to say it doesn't exist, right? Like, it might exist, it might not. Like, like, again, humans, like, why not?
That's great. Well, do we have any other questions from anyone? No? All right. Well, that's a great note to end on. Well, thank you so much. This has been great, and I've really enjoyed sitting with this work, and the show's been greatly attended, so it's really great. And we've had a lot of students in here and several classes too, and a lot of interest in what's going on. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks for welcoming me. This has been a great week. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you all for coming. And our next exhibition opens October 3rd, Trace Extractions. We have 3 artists working in 3 different media whose work explores the pandemic in interior spaces. Take interior however you'd like to take that meaning. So, all right. Well, thank you all. 100%. Yes. Yes. You all feel free to stick around, and there's snacks and water up there. Take what you like. Take a plate home, and yeah, feel free to mosey around and look at the work.